On episode 33 of Chit Chat, we ask the question, is there a board game bubble? Does the board game industry have a problem that's about to burst? Or can publishers and retailers roll with the punches? For now, we have so many games to choose from, and we'll tell you which ones we've been playing. Welcome back to Chit Chat. This is episode 33, and we're going to talk about the bubble, the potential bubble. Is the bubble going to burst? Is there a bubble in the board game industry? There's been a lot of conversation lately. We've talked, this has been going on for a while, but as of late, there's been some conversation on social media about the mechanisms in place, the distributors, the retailers, the publishers, the consumers, and how all that works, and whether or not we're going to see some negative burst, if you will. But before we get into all that doom and gloom, let's talk about who won some games.
All right, so the Climbers is going to Casey Pearson. Congratulations. Make sure you email us at manvsmeeple@gmail.com. Just get in contact with us. And this week we are going to give away Most Wanted from North Star Games. So just make a comment below and you're automatically entered to win.
Yeah.
And the question today is that happening? Could it potentially happen? What are some of the instigators that could trigger that to happen? And what are we seeing right now in the industry that shows us that some of these things are occurring right now? And there's a deep concern with publishers, distributors, retailers about the ever-changing nature of the market and how hot things will push all those normal cyclical games out of the consciousness of consumers.
Yeah, it's a super difficult thing to navigate for really everyone along the chain. And everyone relies on each other. The consumers have only so much money, so the economy comes into play. Retailers have a hard time trying to figure out what they should get, what they should stock, how much they should stock. And then the distributors are in between them and the publishers. And then the publishers are often finding themselves with either too much inventory left over that they don't have a place for or a home for, or not enough, which is what we've heard recently. I think Jamie from Stonemaier Games put out sort of an open letter to, hey, we need to do something to try to fix this. And that is it's a huge challenge. We certainly don't have the answers here today, but it is part of the topic of conversation.
Yeah, I think board games are weird, and gamers are weird. And we know that being gamers, right?
Answer.
The way we spend our money is not like, I feel like, any other industry, because you have people out there that won't pay $40 for a game, but will pay $100 for a game. The only difference maybe even being the packaging, right? The presentation. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about what is the worth of a game or what is the value of a game, people are showing that they are willing to pay more for premium content, while at the same time they don't want to pay for things that aren't premium. And I think that's a really weird place to be in, because it's easy to say games like Tidal Blades that did really well on Kickstarter last year sold that deluxe edition through the roof, right? Because it just looked so good. Well, how do you predict that?
Well, I think too, when you talk about wanting more and better, and you're talking about the $40 to $100, I think Kickstarter is a really big piece of that, right? We saw a 20% increase year over year for 2018 over 2017 in Kickstarter tabletop games. Number one game overall for Kickstarter last year was Tainted Grail, which is now the 13th most funded Kickstarter ever.
And was it not just the number one game, but the number one Kickstarter?
It was the number one Kickstarter period.
Any products on Kickstarter? Out of
any products on Kickstarter. And I think all of us can agree Kickstarter probably runs on tabletop these days. Yeah. The amount of money, like I said, 20% increase year over year. We're seeing decline in video game as well. And that's just Kickstarter. I don't even have off the top of my head the stats for the overall industry, but I was looking at that earlier, and it's really insane when you think about 20%, because I'm pretty sure a number was astronomical last year for a year-over-year increase. So
yeah, I've always said this, when you look at bubbles, you can look at it as a consumer bubble, which I don't think we have. There's just more and more people playing games.
Yep.
Some of the games that are coming out that are sort of somewhat semi-enthusiast are accessible enough for these new people to go, oh, I didn't think board games were this fun. And we've had this conversation before, but there's more people playing games, so that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it's really, I feel, the situation is more to do with the mechanism we have in place. And we've talked about this before too, but things like Kickstarter coming onto the scene and kind of throwing a wrench into how that traditional mechanism has worked, and everyone trying to adjust to that. And I do think there are people who are trying to do that. I actually think, personally, Jamie, part of his strategy now with what he's doing at Stonemaier Games is trying to address that. I'm not sure if it's going to, but I think that is part of what he was hoping to do, at least from what I'd heard some of why he's sort of foregoing Kickstarters, because a lot of people are looking at Kickstarter as there's all this hotness and hype around it now, and then by the time it hits retail, if it hits retail, that hotness and hype is kind of gone.
It's gone, right? By the time it's retail.
And with Wingspan, you know, he announced it. It's here. You can get it from me directly, and then it's going to be out in short order, pretty much. And I think he was hoping to close that gap a little bit. But even that is a tough decision for him, because some people might say, well, he's leaving some money on the table by not going to Kickstarter. So it is a challenging environment.
I mean, to look at that even more, if you look at traditional retailers, talking your friendly local game stores, and then your online retailers like Cool Stuff Inc. or even Amazon, you're seeing a lot of those games that we would traditionally think, wow, that's a great game. We've all played the game. We all loved the game. We all gave it really high marks. And then maybe 3 months later, we see that game going through a fire sale.
Yep.
And we ask ourselves, why is this really, really good game being sold for $19.99 on these traditional online retailers, even in the local game stores? The reason is these publishers and the distributors don't know what to order. They have no idea what the consumer level is, what the production level should be. Right now, it's impossible to gauge. There's so many new titles every year. How do you compete? Once a game is released into the public, if it's not an instant hit, it's going to be forgotten. Not 6 months from now, not a year from now. It's going to be forgotten in that first 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, and publishers have to think about so many things when they're going. So like when you see specifically to Kickstarter, I mean, this is Kickstarter or even a pre-release, right? So if however you're gauging what your initial sales are going to be, and how you set your price has a lot to do with how many you think you're going to sell, because that's how much it's going to cost you to make the game. And so do I do a 3,000 print run, a 5,000 or 10,000? Those are generally the numbers people are looking at on the low end. I think we're getting away from the 10,000 print runs. We're going to start seeing more 5,000 and 3,000 print runs. Games are going to be harder to get because the publishers aren't going to want to just have dead inventory sitting around, because the retailers aren't going to move it, the distributors aren't going to move it. They're going to move on to the next hottest thing, and that's what's happening. And you're hearing, and you see people like a GTS, they're doing things to help retailers really better understand the products that are on their shelves, to help them move them. They've got this really cool like retail webinar thing they've started doing. But even still, even with those things, like the hotness, the newness of things, and how quickly things are coming out. How many games did they say they released at Essen last year? Insane amount of games at one show at the end of the year. It's like going into the next year, you can't even think about what's coming next. So with the increases that we're seeing across the industry, I think we're heading towards a fewer print run, because and which means games are going to be more limited. I mean, think about smartphone. Nobody can get their hands on that game. Right. It's a very small run, I'm sure.
And then the question is, do they want to reproduce it? Do they want to find a North American partner? Because by the time it's actually reproduced, is it still in the consciousness of gamers? So they want to buy it.
That's the hard thing about doing a small print run, because if you're like Wingspan, for example, everyone wants it. So if you print 5,000 copies and everyone wants your game, and you could have sold 20,000 in a heartbeat, but you didn't. You left 15,000 copies potentially on the table. When your reprint comes in 6 months, there's something better already out.
It depends.
Not necessarily better, but new.
But newer,
what people
right?
are talking about.
You're not going to sell.
You lose out on some of the hotness for sure, unless, like, I think personally that game in particular has a very good retail DNA.
Yeah.
That game is meant to sit on a retail shelf and sell. It's just appealing to anyone who's going to walk into a store.
Not to mention it's a really good game.
Oh yeah, it's a fantastic game.
But it's also gorgeous. It's going to sell itself. They're going to put it out on display because they know it's going to move. Those
it's
little
got that
eggs and the
uniqueness
things.
to it's got everything. It's firing on all cylinders in that respect.
And the
so
price
I think it will
point
have
is good.
Yeah. It'll have a tail.
Good retail price point.
It is built for that, and that's part of also why I think, and I don't know if this plays into his strategy, but part of the reason why it's not a Kickstarter feeling game to me. Like when I think of Kickstarter, I feel like the smaller games don't do as well. It's like you said earlier. People want to go and spend $120 on this ridiculously, produced game. But something like that is meant more for retail. So I do think there's going to be some instances where there are few titles that do that. There's just been fewer and fewer titles that do that. And partly to blame is the number of titles that are coming out. And that's because we as a culture, as a people, want the new. We're just
consumers.
We're boom, 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 boom. We're going really fast from one game to the next. And no one just kind of like sits back and plays or experiences any entertainment slowly or in the same way that we used to.
Well, I think that, so back to the conversation of the bubble bursting, I don't think the bubble of the hobby is going to burst, but I think what we're going to see is things settle. I think publishers are going to either have to merge or die off. I don't think it's going to become as easy for Joe Nobody to just pop into the scene with an average game and
I think
off.
just the opposite. I think with the advent of Kickstarter, that's even more prevalent now. And the larger publishers like your CMONs, your FFGs, or Asmodees, they're feeling that pressure. They're looking for avenues that they traditionally haven't used for media because they know that smaller publishers that use Kickstarter can sell 20,000, 40,000 copies of a game, which is ultimately going to infringe upon their territory and the types of products that they would typically sell. I think, and I don't mean to interrupt you,
fine.
I do think there is a bubble. I do think it's going to happen. I think we've already seen that in the comic book industry in the 80s when the prices became really inflated. There was all kinds of new publishers making comics, and they were throwing out all kinds of these one-shot covers, and the industry collapsed. Marvel sold off in 1986. They went bankrupt. And ultimately, they came out of it. But it's also happened in the baseball card industry where Donruss, Fleer, Topps, Upper Deck, all these companies made all these baseball cards, and they inflated their price. And then all of a sudden, all those cards are worth nothing. There were literally hundreds of thousands of baseball cards that were traditionally worth hundreds of dollars were worth zero the next day.
Well, I would say, though, one big difference between at least those two specific ones you just mentioned, I mean, those are very collectible industries, right? Where I don't think people are, board games it's not apples to apples necessarily in that we're collecting board games to play them once again, not necessarily because, checking the value. They're only going down, really. I don't know of except something that's way out of print.
That's true, but the prices are also going up, and the buy-in cost for a board game is traditionally more expensive than a pack of baseball cards or even a $1.99 comic at that time. So.
Well, and I think when you think about it in a bubble perspective, and you're talking about something like Kickstarter, which is where more and more people are going because of the unique marketing that Kickstarter provides. Like there have been other people who've tried to come out and create a board game specific version of Kickstarter. I think it was called Breadmaker. It didn't really ever take off because, and even Indiegogo, people have gone to Indiegogo trying to do tabletop and it doesn't take off. Kickstarter is where tabletop lives right now. And Kickstarter by nature is meant for new publishers, right? And you have big publishers like CMON on there, and it really crowds the marketplace, especially when they're doing million plus Kickstarters every time they do a Kickstarter. So it really sets the bar at a specific place for Kickstarter. It makes it harder for the little newer average guy to come in there and do it. And frankly, I think where the bubble is going to happen, and it's going to start, it's with expectations. So we've seen an increasing amount of games come out, but they haven't delivered yet. Right? They're all on Kickstarter. So as those games start delivering things like significant amount of typos,
art, graphic design,
I've even heard something recently about, man, this box really wasn't what I expected. It's not quite sturdy enough. The insert isn't good enough. The game, I want game trays instead of this. The organization is important. Those are the kinds of things that I think are going to drive the bubble bursting, and that all those games that are coming out aren't hitting that expectation level. And yeah, maybe that's from Kickstarter, but it's also as our tastes as gamers have changed because we have seen the Tang Gardens of the world come out and be this beautiful table presence, dice thrown with the incredible game trays and the setup and just the attention to detail on it. My expectation is there. I don't want a game on my table that isn't going to be pretty, because my overall experience is what's important now. It's not just because I know Euros maybe tend to be bland, but we've seen beautiful Euros. There's just no excuse for it anymore. And the people that drive the market are the people that want that. And I think that's when we're going to start to see the fall off, is that those games that when they deliver, nobody's going to want to put them in retail.
Sure. But do you think, starting with the consumer, do you think those people will feel burnt and then I'm not going to back that next time? Or
if you aren't seeing a consistent level of production value and quality out of a publisher, especially somebody who's been around for a while, like if you're a publisher or you're CMON or whatever, you can't give me a bad game, because there's no excuse for it. I know you already know what I want, so do it right. And they do. They always do, right? But these newer publishers, the ones that are bringing out lots of games every year that are new to the scene, that's where we're going to start to see. But people that are trying to mimic that model, that it's going to be hard to keep up with that. It really is at that level, and make sure that you don't have issues with your games, that there aren't components, because there's just too much happening too fast. And so I think that's where we're going to start to see publishers fall off, publishers merge. And then also to the point of, I mean, retailers aren't picking up the Kickstarter games. They're too hard to move. They're too expensive. They're hard to sell. To your point about Wingspan, that's a retail game. It absolutely is a retail game. Kickstarter games are not retail games. And you're starting to see publishers have a retail version and a Kickstarter version for that reason.
And there will be a point when backers say, I just can't back anymore. What's the point? I'm not going to play this game for 5 years.
Not just as a
way
backer, but as a
backer.
gamer in general. I mean, we get so many products here. It's impossible for us to keep up, even with the 4 of us playing with different groups and different games. There's just so much product out there. I sympathize with the retailers. I don't know how they can keep up with the product. Who knows what people want, and by the time they may be in their stores, it may be the wrong product.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing a lot of retailers are saying no to a ton of product now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like what you were saying with us. There may have been a time, I mean, before we started Man vs. Meeple, but there's probably a time where you could feel like, I feel like I want to try most games.
Yeah.
That went out the window a long time ago. I mean, there's just,
Yeah.
we have to be able to, and honestly, as unfair as this is, at a certain point as a consumer, you have to be able to take a quick look at the back of the box, maybe hear a little bit something about the rules and make a decision whether or not you're going to play that game.
And despite what most people think, the majority of gamers aren't on BGG.
No.
Yeah.
They're
Right.
they're the normal people that walk into a store and buy a random
Same
board
with
game,
Kickstarter,
so.
really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
exactly.
I mean, Kickstarter, as big as it is in this conversation and in this industry, it really, with the growth that we're seeing, with more accessible games, that has very little to do with Kickstarter.
Well, and I can speak that just for Western Legends, when it came out after Kickstarter and after South Park and everything in it being on that, it was having a whole nother Kickstarter happen. The amount of pre-order sales that were coming in were crazy, and so outside of Kickstarter, there is a huge market. You think, wow, we sold so many games, and then they're selling even more. That's insane. But not every game's going to be able to do that. And to the retailers, the problem is publishers want you to buy a case. And depending on the game, especially when we're talking about a Kickstarter game, that's a big case. It's, at least 6 games of $100 and something game that they have to figure out how to store and make shelf space for. They're really wanting 2 games.
Yeah.
And that's hard for the publisher to sell to them. It's hard for the retailer to sell back, to take the case. And so that's where distributors come in. And then now the distributors are set with the same dilemmas. Like, I have a half a case here because I sent 2 to this guy and I sent 2 to that guy. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. And I don't envy any of the pieces of that puzzle.
At the end of the day, hopefully the best games come through. I mean, we've made that apparent many times on this show. Make the best game possible. It doesn't always translate to sales, but in the end, hopefully those publishers that put their best foot forward with their art, their design, and definitely their play testing, people are going to pick up on it. Wingspan, we've driven it to the ground. We all love that game. We think it does have a life, even after this initial sales that they did on their website, even that it's sold out right now. It's such a good game. It's so appealing to people that want to play it. It's so accessible to people.
Yeah.
Hopefully it has a life, and that bubble for those type of games doesn't burst in the future.
And I think that's what retail has to look at, because retail has to decide who they want to cater to. Like, you want gamers, you want the gamer culture in your store, but the gamer culture, the more people get into games, the more they start chasing the cult of the new, the more they start going to Kickstarter, and that isn't necessarily best for retail. But then if they cater to the casual gamer that comes in and is getting their first game of Catan or their first Ticket to Ride, you also don't want to have your walls stocked just with gateway evergreen games.
In my opinion, if I had to pick, I would say they're in the toughest position in the machine because of what you just said. They're stuck between all sorts of different things going on, and they're in the middle of it all. You've got Target and Amazon and all these things that have that mainstream audience that walks through their stores every day. So they're able to stock a ton of Azul, a ton of Wingspan potentially, these types of games. Whereas, like you said, Friendly Local Game Store has a tougher time doing that because they want to appeal to the Kickstarter crowd too, that hardcore gaming audience. And then they've got Kickstarter competing with them on that front. So they're probably in the toughest position, and they unfortunately probably be, if as negative things happen with any bubble, they'll probably feel the brunt of it.
And I think too with publishers, you're seeing more and more to help the retailers. And
Yeah.
I think if you look at Portal with Detective, one of the things that they did that I think is really neat is they have a self-contained demo. And they did this at the conventions too, which is a different one than the one they sent retailers, but it's like an envelope. And the retailers don't even really have to know the game. They can hand that off to a game group and they can learn the game and play a self-contained demo that doesn't ruin a game for them, gives them what they need, and then they get an experience. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more publishers do that to help, well, maybe not quickly, but publishers should be doing more and more stuff like that, especially for games like Detective where you've got hidden information you don't want people to know, and you really have to be able to sell that experience, but it's hard to sell it. So I think doing more stuff like that is going to help retailers. We should be wanting to help our retailers because we want to play our games at those places, right? They're fun to go to, so I hope
to
we see
introduce people
more,
to new games
yeah,
there too.
Hope we
so.
see more and more publishers and distributors thinking about interesting ways, like what GTS is doing, what Envoy does with having the people doing the store splashes in the stores, helping people learn the games, and like what Portal did with the self-contained. Those kind of things I think are going to help the retailers out long term.
So if you guys have any comments about what you think is going to happen within the industry in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, make them in the comments below. We're going to go a quick round around the table. Or not a table, but around the chairs. But what we've been playing.
Oh, we've been playing, spoiler alert, some Wingspan.
A little bit of Wingspan.
Well, so I was at PAX South. Actually, Kieran and I went down to PAX South over the last weekend, and we played some board games there. But one thing I want to talk about that was super interesting was actually a video game I played there called Final Assault, which was a VR game that was a real-time strategy. But it reminded me of that old Toy Soldiers game where you're wearing the goggles and you're VR, you see your hands, and you're looking at the battlefield. It's on a table, and you're interacting with units by reaching down, picking them up, moving them around this board, basically. And while I was playing it, I even said to the designer after the experience, I was like, this felt like playing a board game. And he said that this is an element that he wanted, that tactile feel of like actually picking up a tank and moving it to a different position on the battlefield. And that just felt so like good and satisfying. And I think that VR environment to play board games in, and I know there's been a little bit of experimentation with this with Tabletop Simulator, but I would actually like to see people from the ground up being involved in that process of like making VR versions of board games and things like that. It was just such a cool experience.
Have you seen or experienced the Catan VR?
Yeah, I have, and I think that's a step in the right direction.
Because that to me felt, I was impressed. I experienced that 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago at PAX, and it was a great merger with that virtual experience, but they mixed in utilizing the digital space. And as silly as this sounds, the coolest thing about that game, I may have mentioned this before, you could take all your tableau of whatever you had in front of you, and I could put it up here in the sky, right? Yeah. So the concept of table space was unimportant. Cool. Like I could sit there and watch the board and, what cards do I have? And I looked up into the sky, and then I could just touch that and pull it over here and take part of it and put it over here and just kind of like look around and like play.
That's all got a really cool factor to it.
It was super cool.
I just don't know if that's practical. Like I don't want to. If I'm going to be playing games, I don't want to sit around with VR sets with all four of you playing it. I want to sit there and play it with you guys.
Sure, but like they're like just the way that this game played, like it opened up doors of like things you can't do in traditional board games, where like the board itself is animated or the board itself changes.
That would be super cool if we can get to that point with VR. But yeah, I'm with Jeremy. I like sitting around and actually being
I
at the
do
table.
too. I mean, I don't think it should replace board games by any stretch. It's just I want to see what that technology can do with virtual board games.
I'd be interested too. I still feel anything that requires any sort of significant headset on your face.
It's counterintuitive to the experience.
It's not likely to ever be fully embraced. You know, things like
Sure.
the iPhone, the touch smart devices took off because it was like, oh my gosh.
Just wait till they're the size of a pair of glasses or
like
whatever.
a pair of 3D glasses that you can wear.
Right,
home,
exactly.
Something like
Well,
that.
I didn't play a VR game.
No.
I did play an app-based game though, Star Wars Imperial Assault, which we started to play and then it fell off like most of our groups do. And so Kira and I started with the Sadlers. So Adam and Brady Sadler, who worked at FFG, done a lot of different work on these type of games, came over and they sat down and played 2 missions with us.
I think it even says
3.
inspired by
inspired.
in the rulebook.
They're in the rule book, so we got to play that. It's not my type of game. I don't like dice rolling. I don't like luck in my games, but there's something about that atmosphere and upgrading and the working together to play in a Star Wars universe. It was just really fun.
Yeah, if it's I don't know that it's my kind of game normally, but I'm playing Star Wars. We were already up against Darth Vader and like the very first mission. Like I'm happy. If it's Star Wars, I'm pretty dang happy, and it definitely gave me that feeling while we're playing it.
Cool.
Well, do I get to be the one to talk about Wingspan?
Sure.
Yes.
Go
So,
for it.
well, we'll all talk about Wingspan, but in addition to Wingspan, before we get to that, I have played more Vindication, as you guys could imagine. I had fallen in love with this game late last year, and I've been getting it more to the table. And I didn't say this was one of my resolutions, but it is now. I want to,
200 games of Vindication.
no, not that specifically, but that what we mentioned earlier about how we're all about new, what's next, and not really soaking in a game and playing it multiple times. We hardly ever do that.
True.
Over the last couple of years.
True.
And I would say in the last month or less, I've probably played more Vindication and Wingspan than I played any other single game in any given year for the last couple of years. Like I've played a ton of both. I just want to introduce it to people, and both games have actually made me want to try new things the next time. Like Vindication does that a big time. There's different strategies to get your points, and it's a big sandbox. You do whatever you want. Plus, it has so many modules. Wingspan, and if you guys haven't heard of it, it's a beautiful game about birds. And I think that theme, a lot of people go, I don't know, a bird game. It's so awesome. And I'll just share this one story. I played it with Alicia, my fiance, and she would never do this. In fact, most of us wouldn't do this these days. After we'd played, I'd caught her looking out the window, looking at some birds on the ground. Just like normal birds, like robins, and there was some other bird. We didn't know what it was, but that's what she was doing. She was just kind of looking at it and wondering to herself, what kind of bird that is? And it made
cool.
me, as sappy as it sounds,
No, I like it.
It was a cool thing to think that a board game made someone sort of stop and smell the roses. But yeah, it was a really cool experience to see that. And I actually said, I bet you wouldn't have done that in a million years had we not just recently played Wingspan.
See, I had that same experience with Dinosaur Island, but I haven't seen any. I've been looking. I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe.
gosh.
Dad joke.
Maybe one day.
Hashtag dad joke.
Oh, goodness.
All right, Kira.
So I think I said in our resolutions that I want to play more things. So when you guys say, it's like this, I don't go, I've never played that. So I got Architects in.
Yes, I taught you Architects.
That was good. I enjoyed that. We've been playing Santorini. We've been playing through the different heroes and gods in Santorini. So we'll keep doing that. We're going to play through all the heroes and gods, right? So, but outside of that, at PAX South, got to experience Pog Throne, which I know I'm big on Dice Throne right now, and I'm thinking there's just no way this is, gosh, it was so silly fun. It's such a good little kind of throwback to my childhood with the Pogs, and it's got all the lovely Dice Throne stuff in it, and I'm terrible at it. I whiffed. If you go see the interview we did, I'm whiffing over and over, but like it's still fun. Like it's a fun game. It's fun to see it kind of come to life in a different way and kind of have a holdover till we get to season 3. But did play that a few times at PAX South, and then
I can see Pog Throne taking off. I can see Pog Throne taking off. Like, it's so silly, but when you go to a convention and you see everyone gather on the table watching people play Strike, I mean, it's kind of that same thing. I mean, it's like a silly, simple, light game, but it's just
Did you also grow up with Pogs? Were
I
Pogs
did,
a thing
yeah, they
for
were
you?
a thing.
See, now I feel very old because I remember being a young adult when Pogs were a thing.
Yeah, no, they were a huge thing. In fact, I got my Pogs taken away multiple times in school because they called it gambling.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because they value and you don't want to chip them. And
this is it's not just Pogs, right? There's more game to it.
You've got a stack
there's more
of
game to
so you've got like your stack of health. So and you're trying to flip those over so your opponent's stack is in front of you and you're throwing down your slammer, I guess is what you would call it back in the day, and you're trying to flip those over. But you also have an active and a passive ability, and the active ability you actually have to catch the thing in the air in order to activate the active.
Which I did. I did one time.
He did it one time.
After throwing it across the room.
And then there's a passive. The passive, I think, probably for the majority of the characters only works once. And so you don't have to catch. You just get to use it once. But yeah, it's fun. And in each character, they're there. It's thematic.
I'm sure the packaging on that game is going to be ridiculous.
I can't wait.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
so this
the
is a
prototype
legit thing they're producing.
This is legit.
It's coming out on the Kickstarter's on Valentine's Day. We're gonna we were talking about it because we've got to still do our tiebreaker for Dice Throne. So we're gonna do ours on the 13th, the day before, because our live stream's the day before.
We left PAX South. I was like, I kind of want to play more Pog Throne.
That's awesome.
I went back. I circled back to that table a couple times. The designers were there, and so I just circled back. I was like, let's just play a quick round.
And anybody was playing. Kids were playing. Adults were playing. It's just, just like Dice Throne, it's super accessible. It's silly fun. It brings the dexterity element into it. I think my husband will like it just as much. He kind of gave me the side eye when I was like, yeah. I just wait till you see it. And then I showed him the video, and he's like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I totally want to play. So
maybe it's time for Pogs to make a comeback.
Right.
For sure.
Just for Pog Throne, I'm totally fine.
Speaking of the year Pog, before you give our
Yeah.
outro, make sure you guys check out our most anticipated games of 2019.
Yes.
We have a lot of cool little spoilers in there, a lot of box covers, a lot of new art and components that haven't been shown anywhere, and a lot of really cool upcoming games.
Yeah, that was really exciting for us to get a hold of that. We did this video, and then Jeremy, after the fact, contacted a bunch of people and was able to get some artwork that has not shown up anywhere else.
Right.
So it is really exciting for us to see that when we get it,
Yep.
and hopefully it'll be exciting for you to check it out. But in the meantime, always follow us on all of our social media and come back here and check out next week's Chit Chat. Well, that's another episode of Chit Chat in the bag. Thanks for watching. If you want to check out another one, there's probably one right over here in the bottom left-hand corner, or probably your right-hand corner. Whatever corner, we have something to click on. So click on one of these things and good things will happen.